Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Paniotis Koutsajorgas,
And my name is Will Foster.
and we are the co-chairs of Energy Week at Duke. Energy Week is a student-run event series in its fifth year, which brings leaders in energy together for a week of learning and networking at Duke University. We are thrilled for all the events this week, which are fully virtual and free, including the Energy Conference on Wednesday. You can learn more about the events and our fundraiser for Grid Alternatives, an amazing nonprofit whose mission is to make renewable energy and job training accessible to underserved communities, at our website, energyweek@duke.org.
And with that, we would like to kick off Energy Week 2020 and thank you all for coming to Climate Whistleblowers. This event was put together by two master's students, Rafi Weinberg and Myra Parsonet, as well as the great team at Ways and Means. And they've all done a fantastic job. We're really excited for the show tonight, and now we're going to pass it over to Ways and Means to get us started. Enjoy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lindsay Foster Thomas. I am the new host of the Ways and Means podcast, and this is Climate Whistleblowers, our very first live event. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for coming. This event is in partnership with the 5th Annual Energy Week at Duke University Initiative. And since this is a podcast event, we plan to do things a little differently from your typical Zoom event. Tonight, we're focused more on listening rather than looking. So grab some earbuds, turn on your Bluetooth, go outside, lay in a hammock, take a walk, sit anywhere except where you would sit in a Zoom meeting. Because in the first part of the show, we will have some visuals on the screen periodically, but more than anything, we want your imagination to take over. There will be time for questions for all of our guests at the end, so keep that in mind. But right now, sit back, relax, turn on your ears, and enjoy the show.
I'm an activist, not necessarily a whistleblower, but I do get information from the inside from whistleblowers.
This is Hilton Kelly. He lives about 90 miles east of Houston in the city of Port Arthur.
Here in Port Arthur, Texas, we live literally on the other side of the railroad track. It's a low-lying area, like in most African-American community across the South. African-Americans, ever since the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, we were always put in areas that was most undesirable by others.
As a kid, Hilton didn't know the area was undesirable. He and his friends wrestled. He was in the Boy Scouts. He even became an Eagle Scout. But there was one thing about his hometown that always stood out to him.
Most of the time you smell the odor of rotten eggs.
Rotten eggs. The town smelled bad. Back when he was a kid, the region's biggest industry was the oil refinery business. That's still true today.
You could also look out your window, your north window, and see the Texaco oil refinery. And if you looked out of the window to the south, then you could see the port and the ships going up and down the channel spewing the diesel.
And it wasn't just one refinery spewing pollution.
We had Texaco, we had Gulf Oil Refinery, Texaco Oil Refinery, and we had Chevron chemical plants and a couple of other. We had Oxbow calcining.
For a time, Hilton lived in a housing project on the west side. It was right up on the fence line of an oil refinery. Hilton says he and his friends would play there, balancing on huge pipes outside the fence.
We used to straddle them, walk on them, and we didn't know any better. We thought it was safe to walk on these things.
And that rotten egg smell, it came from refinery tanks, releasing methane gas.
It was just like this huge plume of gas that sort of flowed through the area. It went right down the middle of the West Side community between my high school and the neighborhoods which I lived in. Me and my brother used to make jokes about what it was, and my mother was like, well, don't worry about that smell. That's money. That's money that you smell. But even though it may have been money for someone, but it wasn't money for our community.
Hilton eventually left Port Arthur. He joined the Navy and was stationed on the USS Roanoke. After he was discharged, He moved to California and became a stuntman on a show called Midnight Caller. He went on to work with Don Johnson and Cheech Marin and Eddie Murphy. Hilton was in Hollywood, living the dream. 20 years went by. One day he came home to Port Arthur for Mardi Gras. He'd heard talk about how community wasn't what it used to be. The oil refinery plants were still going strong, but the city had changed a lot since the 70s.
I walked around, went by my old high school and went by the old elementary school, just reminiscing.
He noticed rundown buildings, and his friends told him there wasn't much for kids to do now. He could see that his hometown needed help, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he should be the one to do something about it.
Kept thinking about it. I just really couldn't believe I was entertaining the thought of moving back to this little small town and, leave the big city where here I am living my dream. And I decided that I needed to go back home to Port Arthur to make a difference.
When he moved home, he started in immediately. At first, his focus was cleanup and activities for the kids. He held a community meeting. Hardly anyone came. Then he heard about the dad of one of his brother's friends, a man named Mr. Dominic, who wanted to make changes too.
And so I went to his home, I knocked on his door and introduced myself.
As they chatted, Mr. Dominic said Hilton was missing the bigger picture.
He said, well, son, this is one of the most polluted areas in the state of Texas. He said, Port Arthur has more industries than any other city around Jefferson County. He started telling me about the amount of chemicals that they dump into the air and the types of chemicals. And so it just blew my mind.
And then Hilton Kelly thought about it. His great-great-uncle had wasted away from brain cancer. Other relatives and friends had died from cancer. He knew lots of people with respiratory issues. In that moment, something clicked.
When I was a kid, I really didn't understand what was going on, and I knew we lived next to these chemical plants, but now it all seemed to make sense. Coming to realize that it was something that was killing the folks here or impacting their lives and making them sick, it really upsetted me because these are people that I love. This is a community that I love.
Mr. Dominic had zeroed in on a critical truth. Port Arthur has some of the highest levels of toxic air releases in the country, according to the EPA. And it's thanks to oil refineries and hazardous waste facilities in town. The West Side in particular was suffering from emissions spewing from smokestacks that surround the community. Hilton Kelly realized that Port Arthur's social issues could only be addressed if the environmental problems were tackled too. So, this former Hollywood stuntman decided to team up with others to investigate what was happening in his hometown, starting with digging into files at the State Environmental Regulatory Agency.
So we started going through these files, and what these files had in them was compliance history of these industries. It showed where they were out of compliance, how much sulfur they were releasing every year, how much benzene they were releasing. And I was blown away by the fact that these guys had been out of compliance for years, and no one, not even the state regulatory agency, was calling them on it or even moving forward with any type of violation notices.
This was in the early 2000s. The more he learned, the madder he got.
And then I found out that all these years, these guys been dumping these emissions into the air that were harmful and knew that they were harmful to people. It really infuriated me. How can they get away with this? I just wanted to make a change. I just wanted to do something to stop the onslaught of the senseless killing, really, literally, of people with these chemicals.
He started calling refinery plant managers about the emissions. No one would take his calls. Soon he was protesting outside the plants.
Here I am carrying the American flag. I got my little crew with me, all of about maybe 8, 9 people that have the guts to stand with me. the guard at the gate was like, "What's going on? What are you guys doing?" We said, we demand that the plant manager come out and speak with us. You guys got to back up. That's what I got from the guard. He said, "Well, no, we're not going to back up. We need to talk to someone today."
He didn't get to talk to anyone that day. Instead, the police came and they had to leave. But he kept protesting and he kept digging. And often his best information came from the inside, from workers at the plants.
So I've gotten a number of phone calls also to where I was given information about certain plant managers. It's very helpful to me. It helped me to understand why they do what they do and how they're able to do it with absolutely no conscience whatsoever.
Hilton Kelly learned more and more over the years. When Motiva announced that it was expanding its Port Arthur oil refinery, Hilton mobilized the opposition. As a result, Motiva made changes. They installed state-of-the-art equipment to reduce emissions. Hilton has negotiated with companies to gain health coverage for the residents of the West Side. He has secured millions from the companies to help West Side entrepreneurs launch new local businesses. He's worked with the EPA to ensure that when companies are fined for flouting environmental regulations, part of the money comes back to the community. In 2011, he was awarded the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize for his work helping to clean up Port Arthur. He's still fighting for a cleaner environment and for the health and safety of his community. And he couldn't do that without the help of his friends and neighbors, especially whistleblowers. People who take the risk to come forward and reveal the rule-breaking going on inside their companies.
When I'm in a grocery store, I run into people that will pat me on the shoulder and say, "You know what, Mr. Kelley, really appreciate what you're doing out here. You're doing the right thing." Because, it was one night I was working at one of the units, and man, they released some stuff in the air and everybody in the control room was praying. Many people that, are considered whistleblowers, they care about the community that's being impacted, and they have to live with themselves at the end of the day.
Hilton Kelly says many laws and regulations that should protect the environment are already on the books. But we still need whistleblowers to help make sure oil and gas companies follow those laws.
I mean, if we could get these guys to just obey the Clean Air Act laws and regulations, that would be a great step in the right direction with reducing the amount of carbon emissions that's being dumped in our environment that are killing thousands of people every year. That office was put in place to help protect our environment, which helped to sustain human life for all of us on this planet. That office was put in place to help protect human health, to keep our citizens strong and healthy so that we could protect our country, but yet they play politics with human health.
I see you a smoke rising in the air. 2, 3 in the morning when you think no one is there. In the still of the night, my child starts to sneeze. In the still of the night, the other starts to wheeze. Your bright torch, it burns all night. To find my way through the house, I don't even need a light. The roar of your flame, I've learned to ignore. Even though it's combustion, vibrate my feet up on the floor. I knew I live at the back end of town and I should just be quiet and not make a sound. You might even find this a little profound, but me and my neighbors are a light and dark shade of brown. I hope our leaders don't conspire to circumvent, because these findings I have a sulfur benzene scent. Excuse me while I cough. My throat has a slight tickle. The air I breathe is smells and sometimes very fickle. If you went to take a bath and saw a rash upon your chest, would you just shrug your shoulders and wish yourself the best? This money they give is great, and this is only flesh. But if you had the right insurance, you could go and take a test. Oh, I'm scared I'll lose my job if the pollution I contest. But if you died tonight, would your killers confess to the poison they put inside you that laid you down to rest? Would your family have to fight to pay your doctor bills as you lay 6 foot under up on a grassy hill? Now your job is gone and your company grievance has faded. Your spouse and kids tried to collect from them, but they said your death was not job related. My toxic reality. My toxic reality. My toxic reality.
Hi, everybody. I'm Deondra Rose of Polis Duke Center for Politics. I also host the Ways and Means podcast, Short Takes. I'll be moderating the next portion of tonight's event. If you have questions for Hilton, please add them to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and he'll be with us live later in the hour. Hilton Kelly's story is so powerful. It's no wonder he won the Goldman Prize for Environmental Grassroots Activism. But Hilton is the first to say that his work depends on others who can't be visible or who don't want to be. There's a name for those people, insiders who don't want the spotlight, but who are still moved to action. We call them whistleblowers. Whistleblowers occupy a unique space in the eyes of the American public. They're portrayed as heroes or traitors, lionized and villainized in newspapers, magazines, books, and movies. Think of the lone actor bringing down a greedy corporation or corrupt politicians and overcoming impossible odds to expose the truth to the public. Here's a look at some famous whistleblowers in pop culture.
Frank Serpico. Serpico, get in.
Hey, Serpico, do you know what they're saying in the Bronx? That you spilled your guts to the grand jury. Say it isn't so, Serpico.
All the President's Men. The story of the two young reporters who cracked the Watergate conspiracy.
You tell me what you know, and I'll confirm. Just follow the money. An insider, ready to speak the truth. A reporter who will help him reveal it.
You have no actual training.
I have kids. Why are there medical records and blood samples in real estate files? Would you mind if I investigate this a little further?
How about this guy, Whitaker? The guy's making $350,000 a year, and he turns informer.
You guys still think I'm gonna be okay at the company, right? I mean, you guys are gonna take down the bad guys, but I'll be okay, right? Listen, I haven't.
Whistleblowing is in our DNA, and the US has some of the strongest whistleblowing laws in the world. The Continental Congress passed what is believed to be the world's first whistleblower law in 1778, just 2 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed. In 2018, whistleblowers helped the IRS recover over $1.4 billion in tax revenue. Our next guest is Karen Torrent. Karen serves as Policy Counsel for the National Whistleblower Center, a leading nonprofit dedicated to protecting and rewarding whistleblowers. So Karen, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you.
So Karen, whistleblowers are important, but there's a really big gap when it comes to whistleblowers and the climate. So your group has worked with lots of whistleblowers. Can you give us, maybe an example?
Sure. So when we talk about climate, what's a climate whistleblower, right? Typically, it's someone who comes from the fossil fuel industry. So oil, gas, coal. It can be somebody who works on a pipeline that knows that methane is leaking out of it, and that's unsafe. It could be someone who works at an oil company and knows that the company has not been paying the required royalties to the United States. Or it can be someone who works in a coal company or trades coal and knows that they are misrepresenting what's on, what kind of contaminants that coal might have. So that's the range. And then we go to more sophisticated whistleblowers, such as what I like to call climate finance risk, which is really not brand new, but brand new in a lot of people's minds because of the amount of risk, which is trillions of dollars that could destabilize our economy. So yeah, that's pretty great stuff.
So what leads someone to become a whistleblower in the first place?
Well, certainly not for fame and fortune. That's to the contrary. Usually because it's like we've heard, people step up because it's the right thing to do. They're motivated by doing the social good and by being a good public citizen. So that's really what motivates them. When you look around, I saw the montage you did of all the whistleblowers, but I would add to that every crisis we've had in the United States, there's been somebody blowing the whistle. In Enron, we had a whistleblower, right? In the 2008 financial collapse, we had whistleblowers. And all this gave rise to the Dodd-Frank laws that we have today that actually offer rewards to whistleblowers to get them to step up, because being a whistleblower is very, very hard. You use your reputation, right? You're ridiculed. You could lose your job. But that's why we have such strong protections.
So Karen, can you tell us a little bit about why it's so hard for people, a little more about this, why it's so hard for people to choose to blow the whistle on polluters in particular?
So it's hard because of the downside to them. It could affect them economically, like their job, their benefits, whatever. And so people don't want to be standing up calling this out. When I worked at the Department of Justice, I saw more communities like what you just talked about, Port Arthur, which is one of the highest pollution contaminating in the world. But we didn't have a lot of whistleblowers that came out and blew the whistle on our cases. We only got to them when we started litigating and finding witnesses. So it's very hard for people to come forward. And one of the reasons I think is because there's also a lack of education that whistleblowing even exists. We noticed that recently with the COVID cases. We had several nurses that came forward and they didn't know that they could come forward and be protected. So I think we have a lot of work to do educational wise to let the public know that, hey, there are whistleblowers. This is what it is about.
And so can the government just use environmental policies that we have in place?
To do what?
Like instead of actually leaning on special protections for whistleblowers?
Yeah, so we have clean air, clean water, and all those environmental acts, right? The problem is that, well, with this particular administration has rolled back a lot of the enforcement of those laws. So in cases like Port Arthur, where there have been multitude of consent decrees on refineries and chemical companies, there's lax enforcement. They're not following up with that. And in fact, I took a peek at Port Arthur to see where those consent decrees were, and there hasn't been anything done in Port Arthur since 2012. And you can't tell me that there's no more emissions in Port Arthur.
So if companies ignore climate change, in addition to the growing climate crisis, there could also be a financial crisis. Is that right?
Oh, it's actually makes the COVID look narrow and small in comparison. It's estimated to be about trillions of dollars. And just think about that. That's crazy, right? Because you could be holding assets in your portfolio of Exxon or fossil fuels that all of a sudden become worthless. And that would destabilize the markets, not only here in the United States, but across the globe.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. I'm going to bring Tim Profeta into the conversation now. Tim is calling in. So for those of you who are with us on Zoom, you won't be able to see Tim, but you can hear him. Tim is the director of Duke's Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions. His group has partnered with the National Whistleblower Center and the Global Financial Markets Center at Duke University Law School in a project called the Climate Risk Disclosure Lab. So Tim, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and sorry not to be there in quote person unquote.
Well, Tim, to start things off, how will you and the new lab encourage more climate whistleblowers to come forward?
Well, I was listening to Hilton's story, and his description of a whistleblower is a person who came forward to let people know that somebody's breaking the rules. And so that one of the first things with, the Climate Whistleblower Lab or the Climate Risk Disclosure Lab and working with the Whistleblower Center is there needs to be a better definition of what those rules are so people are aware when they're being broken. We need to, as Karen said, there's risks to our financial system and our companies and people invest in our companies from really two kinds of risks from climate change, from physical risk of, you own infrastructure that's going to be affected by storms, surge, et cetera, or actually transition risk. You are in a business that may be transitioned away from because of climate change. And that really needs to be made apparent under our financial regulatory laws to potential investors. This is an area that's really moving very quickly right now. There's been actually even our Chairman Powell of the Fed just noted that climate risk is a significant risk in the financial markets just this month. But it's rapidly developing, and so people don't really have an awareness of what the law is and what the requirements for disclosure are. So the lab's really going to look at first helping develop that law and the clarity of what the rules are, so that the whistleblowers will know then when they're violated.
So there's a lot of media attention around the responsibility that corporations have for climate-related environmental damage like oil spills, but there's been little attention paid to the importance of financial accounting and disclosure, as you mentioned a moment ago, when it comes to companies and climate change. Can you tell us a little more about why you think that is?
I think it's because, it's a little bit difficult to really put your finger on the specific risk. Some of these risks seem attenuated to the individuals or the individual companies. But when you think about something like being in the business of fossil fuels or being in the business of coastal real estate, there's incredible risk from what we're seeing happen in climate change. Kind of the systemic risk that like Karen said would dwarf the type of impacts we saw just from the pandemic. And that really needs to be apparent to investors. So it's a little attenuated. It's not as clearly in your face as the rotten egg smell in Port Arthur, but it is so systemic that it could have very, very significant impacts on our markets, and that's why it really needs to get disclosed.
So Kim, I'm really curious about your expectations for the Climate Risk Disclosure Lab. What would success look like?
I think what we're really trying to achieve for the Climate Risk Disclosure Lab is first we're trying to make the lab a place that helps the development of this law and these regulations and this knowledge of what disclosure is required of climate risk across our financial markets. So success would be that the lab is a generator and helps shape the rules of the road for this disclosure. Success also would be that beyond it just being a place that generates its own knowledge, it becomes kind of a commons where people come to write, to think together, and to help develop this in more of a public commons way. And then last, we'd like it to be that resource that climate whistleblowers could come to see what the rules are and make sure they know and feel comfortable that what they're seeing is actually in violations, and thus they'd be comfortable coming forward when there really is, as Hilton said, somebody breaking the rules that needs to be disclosed.
Have any whistleblowers come forward just yet?
Well, we've only been up since the summer, unless Karen's aware of one. I'm not. I think we're really starting to start with the development of both the lab as a resource for people to look at, and I think we really need to help the rules be shaped first, because really, as I said, is a very active discussion right now. The CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Corporation, under President Trump, just in the last couple of months, came up with a large report talking about how these financial regulators really need to create much stricter and much more scrutiny on the disclosure on climate. But that just happened. So I think the first phase is going to be really helping develop those rules before we could expect a whistleblower to feel confident that they can come forward and claim a violation thereof.
Right. So right now there is no disclosure obligation for any of these companies anywhere. The EU is way out ahead of us in making that mandatory. We do not have mandatory disclosures. We have voluntary disclosures.
So Karen, this question is for you. Earlier in the hour, we met Hilton Kelly, who won a major environmental prize for his activism in Port Arthur, Texas. One of the oil refineries there, Motiva, is the largest oil refinery in North America. Is a region like Port Arthur the type of place that you're most concerned about?
From a physical perspective, certainly you're going to find more there. For instance, in Port Arthur, I'd be interested to know whether that refinery gets hit with increased water levels, right? Increased water levels have a tendency to shut things down when the water gets up there. So that is a physical risk that affects their finances that should be disclosed. And I guarantee you that if you and I went and looked at Exxon's or whoever the refinery Motiva's disclosure documents, it doesn't say anything about that, right? So yeah, I would, where environmental emissions are concentrated, I would expect to find a majority of whistleblowers in that area.
I wonder, for both Karen and Tim, can you all give us an example of a whistleblower story that worked well?
Well, worked well. So as I was talking, I can give you one. You remember Enron? That worked out really bad for the country, right? But what it ended up doing was it resulted in the Sarbanes law being passed. And then, as I mentioned before, you remember the 2008 financial crisis? So that crashed because a lot of our banking and securities were so siloed, they didn't talk to one another. And so now with that created the Dodd-Frank Act, which is huge. It's 800 pages. And the impact that it had on our financial, all of our financial sector and the banking sector is huge. Not only, and it did contain whistleblower provisions within that, but it allows them to de-silo and provides a large amount of financial stability that we can actually build upon right now to get more climate disclosure.
Thank you so much. Tim, how about you?
I'm afraid Cran took my best examples. I think, but the whistleblower in Enron, brought to the fore, some abuses that, yes, created a knowledge of how these markets were being regulated or the rules are being violated. That helped us crack down on those such violations in the future. So that was going to be the one I went with as well.
Yeah, and Deondra, if I may add one more, just to kind of balance it out on a pollution aspect. There was a couple of whistleblowers that blew the whistle on the cruise ships who are dumping right in the ocean, and the Coast Guard took a look at it, and actually those cases were successfully prosecuted by the Department of Justice. And it was the whistleblowers. The important thing about whistleblowers is they're usually situated where the best eyewitness could be, right? So they're the ones who know that in Port Arthur, hey, that smokestack's flaring even though it's not supposed to, right? Or the pipeline's leaking methane emissions. So oftentimes, those people are best situated to have information that's relevant to potential crimes or fraud or misrepresentation.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, to go back to the financial aspect, how bad could it get financially if climate change isn't taken into account by companies?
Tim, are you going to take that, or you want me to take a role?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. I think actually the good news here for the larger economy is most of our most sophisticated companies are already starting to make a transition to address climate change. They're investing in zero and low carbon technologies. But that said, there's a lot of so the broader financial impact, I hope, will not be as severe as they could be. If our companies didn't do that, our energy system underpins, our entire economy, and we'd be faced with a situation where there'd be a stark, painful transition. And Karen can talk to it, but the National Whistleblower Center did a very good report really laying bare how stark that risk could be. I'm just optimistic that a lot of our companies are beginning to look around the corner and realize they need to move away. I will say, though, actually, individuals, part of the financial disclosure law's intent is not just to protect our economy writ large, but to protect individual investors. And individual investors can be ruined if they don't account for climate change and some of the changes that will come from it as well. Karen, I'd actually like to invite you to respond as well, particularly given the center's report on this.
Let me build off of what Tim was saying. We don't have pensions in this country. We have 401ks. And just recently, the Department of Labor came out and said, we don't really want you to be pushing ESG funds. Now, ESG is environmental, social, and governance. Okay, so that's counterintuitive. Wouldn't you want to decrease the amount of risk in your 401k? Knowing that, we would have more disclosure, that Exxon would be really disclosing what its reserves were worth and really disclosing, all this other stuff. So yeah, it's a big problem. And the CFTC just came out with a really groundbreaking, the first of its kind in the United States financial report, and I commend that to everyone. And of course, the UN has documented this all over the place. So it's incumbent upon us to really work towards the Paris Agreement and trying to decrease our emissions across in the financial sector, in the transportation sector, and in all the other sectors where emissions are on the rise.
Thank you so
If
much.
I could just jump in one thing, Deondra, just as I have a legal training, but my spent more time working with the environmental statutes than the financial regulatory statutes. But my understanding of the disclosure rules, as Karen said, most of our disclosure is a network of voluntary disclosure standards. However, there is a general rule that public corporations have to disclose what is material to the investor. And I think we're walking a path rapidly to the point that this sort of climate risk is an absolute material disclosure that needs to be made. And that's of actual required disclosure. It's just we haven't evolved our definition of material yet to be clear what it means for climate risk. But as we're talking about with the CFTC, with the Fed chair's comments of this month, the financial regulatory community is rapidly realizing that this is a significant factor affecting financial performance that needs to be disclosed.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to bring Hilton Kelly back into the conversation now. And to the audience, if you have questions for Hilton or any of our guests, please add them in the Q&A section. We'll look forward to getting to them shortly. Rafi Weinberg is also here. He's a Sanford School of Public Policy master's student, and he'll be coordinating the Q&A period. So Rafi, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. And thanks again for everyone for joining us. So please do ask questions in the Q&A. We have a lot so far, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. The first one is actually for you, Hilton. One of our audience members wants to know what gave you the courage to go up against some of these big corporations and really powerful companies?
Well, actually, I was born and raised here in the city of Port Arthur. I was born in 1960 here in the city of Port Arthur. I went to school here. I went to church here. And I lost my mother due to domestic violence in 1979. And a year after that, I decided that I would join the United States Navy. And so when I joined the Navy, I was in from 1980 to 1984. I got out with an honorable discharge, and I decided to stay in California, in the Bay Area, actually, and just sort of started a career there within the acting business, something that I'd always loved. But after years of being away, I decided to come back home to Port Arthur just to visit and see some friends and relatives and whatnot. And I discovered that our city was dilapidated. This was 2000, February 2000. The city was dilapidated and the air quality smelled a lot like what it did when I was a kid. Having gone to California, I learned that the air quality could have been a lot better. So just to shorten the story, I also discovered that a lot of my friends and relatives had succumbed to cancer. A lot of the kids here, 1 out of every 5 households had a child or someone that had to use a nebulizer or take breathing treatments before they went to bed or went to school in the day. And so there's a disproportionate number of people here in the state of Texas that are dealing with this problem, but particularly here in the city of Port Arthur. We have one of the largest cancer rate populations throughout the whole state. And I wanted to do something to change that. And as I got more and more into my questions with the state and our federal government about the air quality in Port Arthur and the amount of chemicals that was being dumped, I found that what was happening technically and by law was illegal by the Environmental Protection Agency standards and the Clean Air Act laws and regulations that govern us. They were out of compliance, and no one, not even the state, was calling them on it. So that really sort of, sickened me. And it really got me angered and frustrated because I'm watching my loved ones die. And I wasn't going to stand by any longer and allow that to happen without a fight.
Great, thank you. I think this next question would be best for you, Karen. We have an attendee who's wondering, why do whistleblowers have to be protected by special laws specified to them? And they're sort of wondering in the context of other industries have internal code of ethics that sort of protect whistleblowers potentially already. So again, why do we need special laws just for whistleblowers?
Yeah, so companies do have ethical and internal reporting, but what has been found and why we have these laws is when the Senate was considering marking up the Dodd-Frank law, the whistleblowers testified that they had went up the internal chain of command and filed complaints, but they were not acted upon. And instead, these people either lost their jobs or were demoted. So that's why we, as a matter of public policy in the United States, want to encourage people who witness wrongdoing to step forward and not be afraid of retribution or losing their job. That's why.
Another similar question, are there more protections for state or federal agency employees versus private sector employees? Is there a difference in the protections that are available?
Yeah, that's a great question. At the federal level, the federal employees are covered, but those could be improved because right now the way in which you have to go to OSHA to file a claim and there's not enough people to do it, and it takes years for this to happen. So it's not really a good way to go. And as a result, a lot of federal employees are like, I don't want anything to do with that. At the state level, the states have varying degrees of whistleblowers, but not a lot of them have them at all. Usually you'll find them where the state has Medicare or Medicaid, and they've adopted them because they need to adopt whistleblower programs in order to qualify for Medicare and Medicaid federal funds. So, but there's not a lot of states that even do that. So that's the answer to that one.
Tim, I think this next one's probably best for you. We have an attendee wondering, how might the recent presidential election change the Climate Risk Disclosure Lab, the initiative, and perhaps the role of climate whistleblowers moving forward?
Great question. And as I sort of reflect on it, I think actually not that much. As Karen and I both noted, the Commodities Future Trading Corporation under the Trump administration came out with an aggressive report about the need for greater disclosure, clear rules and firm rules, strict rules on climate risk disclosure. The Trump-appointed chairman of the Fed had made a similar statement. Now, you may think you could speculate that some of that is, statements being made in anticipation of a potential change in the president and the like. But I think it showed that the financial sector is not as politicized as some of our other sectors, and within the financial community, there was this increasing understanding of the need for these disclosure laws to be beefed up and clarified. What was in existence before the election. That said, I think there's a lot that a president and a president's new administration can do to increase focus on this topic. I think, for example, the Secretary of Treasury chairs something called the FSOC. It's the Financial Stability Oversight Commission or Committee, if somebody checks me on that. That was created after the 2009 crisis to have a government-wide assessment of big risks to our financial markets. And a new Secretary of Treasury can put this on the agenda of that organization, which includes the SEC and the CFTC and all these financial regulators. And in that sort of way, I think this election will matter a lot because President-elect Biden has pledged to make climate one of the 4 priorities of his administration, and a whole of government approach, looking at all the various roles of government in the economy and in society that affect climate change is something he's pledged to do. So there could be some acceleration of these trends I've already identified in the private markets through the leadership of a new president. One thing I want to actually go back to on Karen's question, just quickly, Karen, we've talked a couple of times about the incentives that Dodd-Frank created for whistleblowing in private firms. Could you, because I'm not confident I'll have it exactly right, but can you tell the audience what that incentive is? It's really a pretty significant incentive to try and really promote, honesty from these private firms.
Sure. So if there's a securities violation and the whistleblower gives original information to either law enforcement, the SEC, or a member of Congress, and the result is that the SEC recovers more than $1 million, the whistleblower is entitled to receive anywhere from 10 to 30% of the actual amount that's recouped by the SEC.
We have a question going back to you, Hilton. An attendee wants to know, how do you see the role of local and state government in supporting whistleblowers in the fossil fuel industry?
Well, I see the role of the local and state government as being very, very critical to making sure that person is protected, because most of the time, whenever you have a whistleblower in a particular city, then that city benefits from the information coming from that whistleblower. Due to the fact, case in point, here in the city of Port Arthur, there are tons and tons of sulfur dioxide that is emitted into our air quality. It impacts the respiratory system of basically all the citizens in the West Side community. And we have a high concentration of benzene that's released periodically, even though it's a known carcinogen. So therefore, we have a disproportionate number of people here sick with cancer. We have a lot of folks dealing with respiratory issue. It would be behoove of any community or any state to have its citizens healthy so that they could be productive. They need healthy communities. We need healthy people. We need to protect our communities because we are the backbone and we are the people that make this nation the strong nation that it is. So therefore, I think that our governments, really local and state governments, do not do enough because they're all looking at that bottom line, that tax dollar that these industries should be giving back to those cities and to that state, but that's not always the case.
Great, thank you. I think we'll take our last question here, and coming back to you, Karen, can you talk about how whistleblowers are actually defined in terms of legal protections? And are there potentially loopholes that companies getting reported on can use to threaten whistleblowers?
Yeah, so a whistleblower is generally defined as an employee. And for the securities and a financial aspect, is an employee of a publicly traded company, right? So if you're in a private company, this is not going to apply to you. So that is, in fact, a loophole. Definitely.
Great. One more last question here. We have an attendee who wants to know, is very impressed by Hilton. Any chance you're going to run for public office?
That is a very, very good question. Actually, I have been pushed by the citizens here for the last 6 years to run for mayor. As a matter of fact, after Hurricane Harvey, the then mayor deemed the 19th Street here in Port Arthur, which is the predominantly low-income people of color community, he turned it into a big landfill to expeditiously pick up material that had been damaged by the storm and to put it in that community because the dump site was so far away. And we fought tooth and nail to get that dump site removed and shut down immediately. We won, and I promised him that he would not be mayor for that next term, and he wasn't. But they wanted me to run, and I kind of see myself as a guardian at the gate for environmental justice and climate justice. I think right now what's going on with the changing of the guard with Trump, because Trump played a key role in trying to reduce enforcement actions. He fought to reduce enforcement within the NEPA Act. I was there in February on the Hill fighting to keep that act strong.
He also tried to silence the citizens. He was pushing for the rule where you had the comment period for citizens like myself here in the city of Port Arthur. He was trying to eliminate that rule from the NEPA Act. He didn't want to give citizens an opportunity to speak up if they did or did not want an industry in their community. And let's just say someone was planning to put a new industry there. He said he wanted to streamline the process. So kudos to the president, the new administration that's coming in. We are very excited about that. And I think we're going to have a new opportunity to get things right in cities like Port Arthur, in the Deer Park area, in Houston. The Houston Ship Channel is a giant area where you have industrial complexes that will blow your mind. So yeah, I am thinking about running for some office, maybe in another 5 years. I just turned 60 in August, so August the 18th. So I'm looking forward to maybe turning 65. I think I'll still be ready to hold that particular office.
Still a young man, thank you.
Still a young man.
And I'll turn it back to Deondra to close us out here.
Thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. Hilton Kelly, Karen Torrent, and Tim Profeta, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Hilton Kelly, he's with the Community in Power and Development Association in Port Arthur, Texas, and a future political candidate. Karen Torrent is from the National Whistleblower Center. Her group has partnered with Tim Profeta and Duke University's Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions and the Global Financial Markets Center at Duke Law School to launch the ambitious new Climate Risk Disclosure Lab. And thanks so much to the Duke Sanford School's Master of Public Policy student, Rafi Weinberg, for moderating the discussion. This event is the kickoff of Energy Week at Duke University. You can find out more about the current season of Ways and Means podcast at waysandmeansshow.org. This season is brought to you by Polis, Duke Center for Politics. Our co-producers for tonight's event are Master of Public Policy students Myra Personet and Rafi Weinberg, along with Malou Fasan Nori and Carol Jackson. Malou also created the visuals and animations that you saw in the program, and music in tonight's event is courtesy of Blue Dot Sessions. A very special thanks to Ways and Means co-producer Allison Jones and Juliette O'Quinn for her help with tonight's event. Our interns are Aaron Blanding, Matt Majak, and Madison Lee. I'm Deondra Rose, Director of Research for Polis, the Center for Politics here at Duke University. And if this was your first time listening to Ways and Means, we hope you will subscribe. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful evening. Take care.